So we've been going through our Restore Finance series, and we've seen several different things. One, we saw that God has called us to tithe. Last week we talked about how do we get out of this bondage of debt. And today I want us to talk about the joy of giving. And this goes beyond the basic idea of tithing that we're called to do, and it speaks to the idea of living a generous life. Now, as soon as you talk about generosity, people think this. They think, you know what? If I just had more, I would be really generous. If I just had more, if I just had more money, if I had more whatever it is, I would be more generous. But you see, that's not how it works. You can go online, and there's videos that you Google. I thought about showing one, but I decided not to. And you can go online, and you Google this idea of homeless people sharing what they have. Because what you see is a homeless person will be given something in this video, and they'll share the little bit that they have with someone else. You see, it's not the idea that I have more that I become generous. It's that I'm generous first. The amount we have isn't what lets us enjoy a life of generosity. It's our heart and it's our attitude towards what God has blessed us with. Mother Teresa tells this story. She said this: "One night a man came to our house to tell me about a family of 8 children who had not eaten anything for days. They had nothing to eat. She said, I took enough rice for a meal and went to their house. She said, I could see the hungry faces, the children with their bulging eyes. The sight could not have been more dramatic. The mother of the family took the rice from my hands, and then she divided it in half, and she went out. When she came back a little later, I asked her, where did you go? What did you do? And she answered, they are also hungry. You see, they were a family next door with the same amount of children to feed, and they didn't have any food either. That mother was aware of the situation, and she had the courage and the love to share her meager portion of rice with others. In spite of her circumstances, I think she felt very happy to share with her neighbors the little I had taken her. In order not to take away her happiness, I did not take her any more rice that night. I took her some the following day." You see, the joy in giving, it's not just tithing to God and giving back to Him what is His, but giving to others and blessing them as you have been blessed. It isn't about how much we have, it's about our heart and how much we trust God to take care of our needs. You see, there's so much joy in giving. In Acts, we see this, Acts 20:35. "In everything I did, I showed you by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak. Remembering the words the Lord Jesus said, it is more blessed to give than to receive." It truly is more blessed to give than to receive. It makes us feel good. It's furthering God's love. It's helping someone in a time of need. And here's the cool thing about giving. When you give, the blessings flow in all directions. It's not just you giving to them and they're blessed. You are blessed with this joy that you can help somebody, that you get to live out what God has called you to do. It's blessings flow in all directions when we live out generosity. Jesus tells us this in Matthew 7. "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." You've heard that before. I mean, the golden rule, do to others as you would have them do to you. It sums up everything, and this is especially true in generosity. Here's what I love about this statement. It is proactive. It is a proactive statement without any expectation of getting back. It doesn't say do to them and wait for them to do back to you. It says you do what you would want them to do. We may never get it back, and that is okay. And here's what matters. When we are proactive with our generosity and we give to people, God smiles. God smiles. He says, yes, that's my child. Have you ever had this time, you have your kids and you look at them and you're excited about something they did? Maybe it's something they made and you're like, yeah, that's my kid. Maybe they sang a solo in the school concert and you're like, yeah, that's my kid. They made a great play in the game and you're like, yeah, that's my kid. They do something and you go, that is my child. Well, see, that's what God does. When we are generous and we are loving other people, God looks down and goes, that's my kid. That's my child, and He smiles. Well, shortly before that statement, Matthew 6:3 says this: "But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." You see, we give because we have been blessed by God. And let me let you in on a secret. You do not need a thank you card. All right, I know. How many times have you been upset that you did not get a thank you card? You did something nice for someone, and then all you can think about now is, I didn't get a thank you card. What's wrong with those people? Instead, God has said, this is what we think. We got to give. We got to help someone. We got to show them Jesus. We got to love. Because, here's the deal. God knows, and that's all that matters. You don't need a thank you card. No one else has to know. It feels so good to be able to bless someone else. And many times, here's the thing. Many times, it's not the gift itself, which is nice and is kind and whatever it is you're doing, because sometimes it could be very small. It's really the idea that somebody's thinking about you, that somebody loves you enough to go out of their way to do something kind for you. And that in and of itself lifts someone's spirits when they are struggling. You see, God has called us to be generous because there is joy in giving. There is joy giving. When we focus on the joy part, we don't focus on the part of, we didn't get a thank you card. You see, we focus on what God has called us to do. Generosity is important for many reasons, and the first is this. Our generosity shows how much God can trust us. Jesus told a parable about the shrewd manager, and then right after that he says this in Luke 16. Whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your heart. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Now there's a couple application points about this section, and the first is this. Our management with a little is the same as what we would do with a lot. So don't trick yourself into thinking, well, if I just had more, I would do more. If I just had more, I'd be more generous. If I just had more, then I would do. That's not true, because you know why I know it's not true? Because God says it's not true. It's not that way. What you do with the little is what you do with a lot. And some people are like, man, if I just made more money, I'd tithe. Or if I just had more money, I'd be generous. No, that's not the case. We do with a little what we would also do with a lot. Second thing we see is this. How we use that little we have defines if God can trust us more. Evidently, and I don't know how this works, God seems to have a giant cosmic generosity grading scale. Because what he says is that if you are trusted with a little and you do good with that little, then I can trust you with more. And I don't know how that works. I don't know what that looks like. But he determines how much he can give us based on what we do with what we have. It's kind of like the idea you get as much responsibility as you can handle. When I was growing up, I never had a curfew. High schoolers, don't listen to this. I never had a curfew. I could stay out till 6 in the morning on school days. I would do that sometimes. I would come home and go get up at 7:30 and sleep an hour and go back to school. I could do that then. Now there is just no way. Couldn't even function. But the reason was because I made straight A's. I didn't get in trouble. I was at church. I had my own job. And I played on the sports team and no problem. No problems. You know why? I'd earned responsibility. My boys the same way. Like if they're responsible, they're making good grades, they're going to church, they're doing all the things that they're supposed to do, guess what? They get more responsibility because they have been responsible. That's how life works. And God says that's the same way with what I've given you. If you're responsible with what I've already given you, you get to have more. You get to have freedom. You get to have more things. Have you ever worked somewhere and you had an employee or a coworker or somebody that you knew was completely incompetent? I mean, you couldn't trust them to tie their own shoes. And they came up or they talked to you or the boss and they said, hey, I think I want to handle some more stuff. It's everything you can have in your body not to just roll on the floor laughing at them. Going, you can't handle anything. I asked you to make 3 copies yesterday and it took you an hour. Like, that's what this is. And whenever we say, hey, you know what, I'll be generous if I just had more, God goes, no. We're like the incompetent employees, like, I can't trust you with this. Why would I trust you with more? You see, God has called us to be responsible with what we have. Jesus also tells us this. He says we have to choose Who will be in charge of our life? We see that here in this section as well. Either our love of money or our love of God. But we can only have one God in our life. That's it. And when we choose to tithe and be generous, we are clearly telling God He is in charge. We love Him more than anything else. And as Jesus is going through this, He begins to get specific about the people who are challenging Him on this. And this is where it really hits home. The Pharisees, so the religious leaders, and to be honest, they're probably about the closest thing to Christians back then, the people who believe that they're religious. And He says this, so His words for them are for us. Don't justify our love of money because God knows better. Don't justify our love of money because God knows better. Value the things of God. That means we tithe and are generous. This problem is one reason I think the world has such a hard time believing Christians really have faith. Here's why. Statistics show that Christians only give 3% of their income to churches. 3%, that's the average. Even pre-Christians know that God has asked for 10%. They know that. They know the tithe. I mean, because they complain about it, because they say every time they show up at church, that's all the church is talking about. So they know that that's what it's asked for. And yet, as general, Christians only give 3%. Our actions do not match up with our words, and therefore, our faith in God must not be strong, is what the assumption would naturally be. If I can't trust God and give Him what He's asked me to do, then I just must not trust Him that much. You see, and the world sees that, and they understand that, and we are pushing people away. So what do we value? Jesus says, put God first, and the rest will take care of itself. You see, our generosity shows how much God can trust us. He knows the joy of giving, and how letting Him be in charge of our resources is free. So the question is, what do you value? What do you value? Then there's this important part of generosity. Our giving and generosity are directly tied to the blessings God has promised. Now, we don't give to get. That is not the idea, but it is how it works. You know the people, you ever know somebody who, if somebody needed help, they're the first ones there. If you say, hey man, I need some help, that person always shows up. They are wanting to help other people. They are kind. But normally, if that person had a serious situation and needed some help, guess what? A lot of other people are going to show up to help them. You know why? Because they've invested in other people. They are reaping what they are sowing. And this is a biblical model. 2 Corinthians says this. Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now, the Bible shows us this clear correlation of sowing and reaping. And this is an agricultural place, so they would understand this. You cannot go out to your field and just throw out a couple of seeds and hope that the field is going to have a whole bumper crop. That's not how it works. They understood that. And we talked about it, actually, whenever I was preaching on the trailer out there, I think. We talked about this idea of throwing out the seeds. They would actually throw the seeds out before they plowed. And so what that meant was they would throw it everywhere. That's why in that parable it landed on the path, it landed in the rocks. They would throw it everywhere and cover the ground in seed. That way, if there was some good ground somewhere, they wouldn't accidentally miss it. And so they understood what Jesus is saying. He's saying, you need to be generous all the time. You need to be using the resources I've given you all the time. They would understand exactly what he was talking about. So sowing generously is being generous as much as you possibly can. It's tithing regularly, and by sowing those seeds, you will see a bumper crop. But then he adds verse 7. He says this, do this cheerfully. Sometimes that's hard. This doesn't mean you're like, oh shucks, I got to tithe. Stinks. You know what I do with that 10%? I can do a lot of good stuff for myself. That's not what he means. He's saying you get to worship God. It's an opportunity to give God something that from us that he's blessed us with. It is an offering to him. And we do it because we are so thankful for what he did for us. We are joyful when giving. I think I told you a story before. At Chandler, we ended up helping out another church, and they we kind of took that over and to help guide them. And I went down there and preached one Sunday, and so I go down there and preach, and I do an offering offering time devotion, and the offering plates come by, and everybody starts cheering, and I'm thinking to myself, that offering meditation was not that good. I don't know why you're cheering. Evidently, the week before, the pastor who'd been down there and for each one of our staff had talked about this idea of being joyful and giving, and so they took it to heart. And so when the offering plates were passed, everybody started clapping and cheering. And they were so excited. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily have to do that, but that's the mental image that I want us to have, is this isn't like, oh, no, I got to do this again. It's, yes, I get to give back to God, and that means I am sowing seeds, that God is going to create a bumper crop. It is, thank you, God. I have been blessed to give you back some of what you have given me. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8 through 11 says this. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. I love how Paul writes. I love how Paul writes. He's so smart. And he ties these things together. He says this.